actually my grandson, so we're all happy with that.
Thank you, Chief. Do I have a motion for this ordinance?
So moved. Second.
Is there any further discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to dispense with 3 reads?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Now, any discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For ordinance 2021-26, to dispense with the 3 reads, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
For the ordinance, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We turn now to ordinance 2021-27, an ordinance appointing Gregory Lee to the position of full-time police officer with the Glendale Police Department and declaring an emergency. Chief Walsh, would you introduce Mr. Lee?
Greg, you want to step forward?
Don't.
Greg's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati Police Academy.
Yeah.
Served as in the Army
I also wanted
Reserves,
to go around
Army
shaking
and Army
hands.
Reserves. He's been with us for 5 years as an auxiliary part-time, and now he's going full-time. Likes to spend time with his daughter, 9-year-old Michaela. Greg. You want, Dewo? You want to pin his badge real quick?
Do I have a motion for this ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Congratulations.
And a motion to dispense with 3 reads?
So moved. Don't go far.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, don't go too far, officer. I need to swear you in. Okay. But first, we have to vote you in. So, I don't hear any further discussion. We have a motion and seconded on the table, dispensing with 3 reads. So, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For ordinance 2021-27, to dispense with the 3 reads, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
For the ordinance, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
Aye.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. As you can see, it's been a while since I've done this in person. So what I'm going to do next is the ordinance 2021-28, appointing another new police officer. And then when we're done, I'm going to swear them in together, and then we will do the traditional handshake with council, but that handshake can be dispensed with by anyone who feels the need for a little social distancing, and they can nod, they can, wink, they can do whatever they want. The next ordinance is 2021-28, an ordinance appointing David Herring to the position of full-time police officer with the Glendale Police Department and declaring an emergency. Chief Walsh, can you tell us about Mr. Herring?
David's been a police officer for 18 years. He served 16 years with Butler County Sheriff's Department before coming to Glendale in 2019, where he served as an auxiliary officer and then part-time, and now to the rank of full-time.
Okay. Thank you. Do I have a motion for this ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to dispense with 3 reads.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For ordinance 2021-28, to dispense with the 3 reads, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
For the ordinance, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Hoeweller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay, so we're going to do the swearing in now. Then I'm going to bring those firefighters back up here. We're going to swear them in too. And there is as I say, a ritual of shaking hands with council.
Protect and preserve the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of Ohio.
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
And I will faithfully and impartially discharge
and I will faithfully and partially discharge
my duties as a police officer in the Glendale Police Department.
my duties as a police officer in the Village of Glendale Police Department.
So help me God.
So help me God. You too. Well, thanks.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you again.
Welcome again. Congratulations.
I will now ask the 4 firefighters who have been, are they all here? Yep. Okay. The 4 firefighters who were just appointed to the position, please come forward so I can swear you in.
Yeah, they look very young. That's the good stuff.
Yeah, love it.
Our thanks really to both chiefs for consistently finding such high-quality people to come forward and serve the Village of Glendale. I'm going to turn now to Resolution 2021-15, a resolution authorizing the conditional use of land owned by John and Amy Danis, located at 890 South Troy Avenue for an above-ground swimming pool to be constructed pursuant to certain conditions. This being a resolution, we don't have to waive 3 reads. What'd I do?
That's what it's on. You do not have to wait 3 reads for the
I know, right. Okay. And I can tell you that the Planning Commission, in the meeting immediately following this one, voted to approve this, recommend approval of this conditional use to council. It now stands for council to determine whether to approve the conditional use. Do I have a motion for this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
And there's no dispensing 3 reads. Okay. So, is there any discussion? Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For Resolution 2021-15, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Hoeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We turn now to a verbal resolution, and this is Verbal Resolution 2021-16, the appointment of a new member of the Glendale Urban Forestry Board. I can tell you that just less than half an hour ago, I sat with a group from the Playgrounds and Recreation Committee as well as from the Urban Forestry Board. We interviewed 3 candidates. There was a consensus, a very clear consensus, although all candidates were well qualified, and we were awfully glad that they are interested in village service, and I promised them that we would find opportunities for them. So as we go forward, the candidate from who received the consensus vote will first of all require a request for recusal by one of our council members. The candidate is Arlene Hoeller, and I am hereby recommending appointment of her to the Urban Forestry Board, seeking a motion from council to approve. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. And I will entertain a motion from a member of council to recuse himself if he feels that's appropriate.
I would like to motion that I recuse myself.
Okay. You are recused, sir.
Thank you.
I just want to say how much we enjoyed meeting with Arlene, and we look forward to getting a tremendous amount of service from her on the Urban Forestry Board, not only in what her true passion is, which is gardening and plants, but also in fundraising. We hear she's done a lot of that. So we thank you, Arlene. Do I have any further discussion of this resolution? Okay. Since it's a verbal, do we need a roll call vote or what?
Do a roll call vote.
Okay. Okay, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For Verbal Resolution 2021-16, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
I believe Ms. Hoeweller is in the room. If so, would you come forward so I can swear you in? Okay, we are going to move on to public comment. And the first stage is public comments that are not related to the recommendation of the Planning Commission regarding a conditional use for the property at 42 Washington Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're here to comment on that subject, wait, you will get your turn. But right now, it's for anyone who wants to address council about any other subject. Just come forward to the podium and introduce yourself and start in. I thought there were other.
Is this okay? Everybody hear me? My name's Ron Vischer. I'd like to address the estimated budget meeting that I just attended. I believe there's a resolution 2023-17 that is going to involve adopting this estimated budget. In April of this year, April 21st, I attended a finance meeting in which there was an entry for a capital expenditure of $350,000 for a fire truck. I realized that that was a planning document and not a commitment. When I looked at the budget, estimated budget for 2022, hoping to find that $350,000 as a line item there, I saw that that item was not present, and instead there was a zero. And I was trying to understand the exact meaning of that. David and I had a healthy discussion concerning where that came from. But I'd like to just point out to council that $350,000 is just the first piece of planning for a $700,000 fire truck. And I think it would be good if the documents that we were putting together were consistent in acknowledging that we have this major expense upcoming and that we need to plan for that expense. I'm particularly interested in that my son is a volunteer in the fire department, and as a volunteer, he informs me that one of the key purposes of upgrading our fire equipment is the safety associated with it. The new fire trucks have anti-lock brakes, they have airbags, they have other things that are very important when you're volunteering your service and your time and you'd like to work in the safest environment possible. And I just want to make sure that there's not a misunderstanding that we're not facing this $700,000 budget item upcoming that really is important to the fire department, and that we continue to plan for it. And in that the estimated budget for 2022 didn't seem to plan for that, I was concerned. David has assured me that there's no action item associated with that the council can change the budget for things like that whenever they need to. But I'd like to comment that I think the planning process could be a little bit more easily understood by the residents if there was some consistency in the documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to address council? Yes. Okay.
My name is Kevin Parrish, resident of Village of Glendale at 176 Washington. It's several issues to address, mainly with the water issues in this village. Mainly the lack of communication from the village to residents. Last year, when we're doing the bridge situation, then we got a notice of violation. Right now, I'm reading from August 26, 2020, compliance letter signed by Mayor Lofty, going to the Southwest Division of the EPA, where they wanted to, and be in compliance, give a plan for the CMOM. Now, most people don't know what the CMOM is, but it's a capacity management, operations, and maintenance program, which addresses issues in this community. In that letter, they were applying for a loan with the WPCLF project. I noticed that in January, I asked about the figures on that loan, which were $62,005 for planning and $110,000 design. They resubmitted another loan in December of 2020, but yet they did follow the same protocol or application that was on the first one. So in January, I asked them about the loan and the money that was supposed to be awarded in January. It did not get awarded till February, and it was $90,000. I've been able to find no documentation of a modification of the original loan, and it puzzled me because you have to ask for what you want. They don't give you more money than what you need. But that's just one of the issues. Lately also, we've been in litigation, Kevin Parrish versus Village of Glendale and public information, public records. In September of last year, I put in for public records that the village administrator and the public records department still deny that they have no knowledge of. During mediation, as recent as the 29th, we terminated that because I asked to view records physically at the village administrative office, and yet when I came for that appointment, they made me a copy of one document, which was a contract of people who did work on the Phase 1 sanitary sewer project. I asked them that on a specific date, which was December of 2017, Televac was on the street less than 200 feet from my house in a hole, and yet they said they had no information about that. David insisted that we didn't. This here is a picture of Televac on Cole and Washington Avenue on December the 11th of 2017 at 10:48 a.m. I called the operation manager of Televac. His name is James. I asked them about their procedures of when they are on site and what they do.
You have about a minute.
His specific words were, under contract with the Village of Glendale, whenever they are on site, they have an impeccable record of documentation, time-stamped footage and videotape. He said at the conclusion of this, all records were turned over to the Village of Glendale. The Village of Glendale administrator denies this fact and denies that he has records that relate to this Phase 1 sanitary sewer reduction project. I sent him a picture of it flooding. He didn't respond to it, but that is what they say, that that project was completed. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to address council? Hearing no one, we turn to our old business. The first item being an ordinance 2021-25, an ordinance authorizing the creation of the Glendale Family Fund Department as a part of the community fund and increasing estimated revenues and appropriations for 2021. This ordinance was first read on June 7th, 2021, and second reading was on June 28th, 2021, and we now have it is now up for a third read, and so I believe it is on the table with a motion made by Mr. Howeller and seconded by Ms. Masenko on June 28th. So is there discussion of this ordinance?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I have raised questions around it in previous council meetings, and I would like to be clear that while I support the noble goals of the Glendale Family Fund, I am opposed to the fund being merged in with the general funds of the village. I think that if this concept had come to any of council's committees before being presented in council meeting, questions could have been answered and matters resolved. As it stands right now, I am still concerned about disclosures under the Ohio Public Records Act, which we have just witnessed. Any resident can activate and request. So I therefore stand opposed to this. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, there were a few ideas brought forward in council meetings, and then I think there were individual discussions amongst residents as to a different way to manage this fund to address the concerns that Councilwoman Duke has presented, such as possibly a 501c3 or some way of managing this so it's not subject to public records request. For years, we've done it this way, not under a 501c3, but the police department just managed it, and it was not under the general fund as this is proposing. And I wonder if is there a way for us to be able to do this without it falling under the general fund where it is subject to open record request?
Well, as you recall, this came about because there were concerns expressed by our treasurer, among others, and our new acting chief of police about the way we were doing it before. Mm-hmm. That the money was coming in, and we know it was being spent well, and we know it was spent properly, but we did not have a paper trail that would show it. And so we really felt that the logical way to do it, if we are going to continue to have the chief of police involved in the management of the fund, mm-hmm. that it should come in under the community fund. The fact of the matter is that as long as the chief was running the program, the disclosures that people are concerned about could have been forced anyway. We knew that, and that was the advice of our solicitor. Mm-hmm. So we felt that the way to do it was just pull it into the community fund. The names will not be in the community fund. They will not be, that's not where they'll be. The expenditures, the revenues coming in and the expenditures going out will be in total form. And if some donors wish to remain anonymous, it was suggested that they could give gift cards. But right now, we have a way of taking this program out from where I think it represents a concern for us in the audit coming up. And it is not going to increase the risk of any disclosures. So that's why we ended up here.
It's not going to increase the risk of disclosures. And did I hear you say that the money going out would be shown in total and not to individual recipients or gifts or otherwise?
Within the village records.
Within village records? Yeah.
There will be other records that can be obtained by someone who wants to obtain them. And that's the case now, and it will be the case in the future, and it would be the case under a 501c3.
I'd like to add another little point of clarity to that as well, that as far as recipients are concerned, the village would not write checks directly to those who receive benefit from the fund. Mm-hmm. The village would write checks or process expenditures to stores where the managers of the fund would purchase items that would then be given to those recipients. Mm-hmm. So the only method by which recipient names would appear in village records would be if direct checks were written to those recipients specifically. Right. But that has not been the practice of the fund historically. It's always been a set amount to Target or Walmart or another vendor for those items, which are then given out, but there are no records as.
So we
as far
can
as-
keep the confidentiality of recipients
For the
this way?
recipients, for donators, there are some options for confidentiality if they feel so inclined. But for the recipients, that information would not be entered into the public record based on the current operation
So
of the
that
fund.
makes me feel better then.
Got it.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
there's a hand.
Good evening, everyone. I've been asked to speak to this point because I've become aware, and Ms. Duke asked me to speak about this. I've been aware of the the problem with the lack of confidentiality.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry. I'm Angie Larimer, 32-year resident of this village. I've been concerned about that along with Marilyn and along with other people in the village. And I just want to repeat the comments that I exchanged with Ms. Duke on this issue. She asked me about setting up a 501c3, which would accept the funds and distribute them to worthy individuals in the community. I was vehemently opposed to setting up a 501c3. It's a lot of trouble. It's a lot of very expensive to set up. It involves a lot of time and effort on professionals' points of view, and it's just not a good idea at all. My proposal was to take it off the village books completely and set it up as the independent groups in the village have done, with writing clubs, Monday class, garden clubs, and so forth. Take it off the books with a reporting facility to our financial manager. I think that would safeguard against the confidentiality issues that might arise on both sides, the donor and the donee. I think that might be a thing to consider or not. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larimer, and we realize that this project is currently underway, and for August, in terms of back to school, these suggestions are coming forward to look at ways to improve it.
Sure. We're not going to do this again, though. I want to say that when I say public comment,
Basis, I don't want to get upset. This program has been built by Chief Dave Warman for over 20 years. He has done it from his heart. He knows these people. I came on board in 2010, and we built the Back to School program. No one in this room knows these people better than Chief Dave Warman and the existing police department. This is a matter of, this is the village. This is who we are. We take care of each other. We do not need to turn this into a political arena. Everything Chief Dave Warman ever did in this village was from the goodness of his heart. And I've been doing this new one for 3 solid weeks. We're doing very well. We were getting school supplies in. We have all the backpacks. We have 72 backpacks that were all donated. I was over there today. We've got more than half the school supplies. I went back through everything today, and I put an update out in Glendale Neighborhood Watch. And this is part of me. I love this village. I've lived here for 45 years. And everything good in this village, people want to change. But we've been a good, kind, decent group of people that are compassionate and caring. But we're not political. Please don't do this. All the checks are being made payable to the Village of Glendale. Memo, Glendale Police Department Back to School Drive. This is who we are. It's just wrong. And Chief Dave Warman deserves better, and the people at these tables know that. And to take something away and give it back to your church, to move into Glendale Neighborhood Bridges or something, Marilyn, it's not right. Everything good that Chief Dave Warman did, all of us did together, and we can still do this together. But please, don't. And someone actually contacted me the other day wanting to come over and take pictures of these kids. I was appalled. I was absolutely shocked, and I told her absolutely no. I said, this is private. These children, I've got 65 grandkids. How many people can say that, you know? And I was shocked that someone would want to turn this into a photo op to take all the love and gentleness and kindness out of this program. Because these families have been here, a lot of these families have been here 100 years. I've lived in this village for 45 years, and everything good about this village, the compassion, the kindness, and the generosity, is all part of these programs. And please, please don't take that away. Because a church does, the Proctor Foundation is Christ's church. Proctor Foundation works side by side with the police department quietly, and nothing is ever divulged. The Presbyterian Church works side by side, Chief Dave. We deliver 24 boxes, and Christ Church quietly gives 50 gift cards. I mean, this is done as a group effort, but it does not belong to a garden club or a Monday class. It belongs to this village. I'm sorry, but this is part of me. And you all know I don't have grandkids, and I'm sorry, but it would break my heart.
Okay, for the record, that statement was from Beverly Rickoff, resident who has run the program for many years. Is there any further discussion?
So, Mr. Mayor, I urge council to vote in favor of this so that we can continue the program as soon as possible and that we can meet all the regulatory requirements that the village needs to abide by.
Okay. Okay, we're not having cross discussion now.
Okay. No, just one last comment, Don. It sounds to me as though the program can continue to be worked as it has been with the police department and the other volunteers close to the police department being involved with it and on the direct front lines with it. And the only thing it sounds like that it will change is we have to be able to have proper record keeping within the village for the way the money moves in and out, but confidentiality can be retained for recipients, and that sounds like it works for me, and if it doesn't, we revisit it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For the ordinance 2021-25, Mr. Bessel,
Aye.
Mr. Howeller,
Aye.
Ms. Duke,
No, not this ordinance.
Ms. Masenko,
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith,
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion carried. No, it's a third reading. I almost asked for it myself. No. Okay, we turn now to a discussion of the recommendation. I'll read this resolution. It's a recommendation in a resolution of recommendation reflecting the recommendation of the Glendale Planning and Historic Preservation Commission to the Council of the Village of Glendale, recommending approval of the application of Denny Dellinger, agent for owner, 42 Washington Avenue LLC, for a conditional use permit for a residential assisted living home at 42 Washington Avenue. Now, what I just read was the title of the recommendation that came to us from the Planning Commission. Council is going to consider this matter, and it will then make a decision on its own resolution concerning this conditional use. We received this resolution at our last meeting on June 28th, immediately after the Planning Commission had passed it. It is indeed a conditional application for a conditional use permit. What that means in our zoning code is that the property in question is zoned residential, but there are a number of other uses under the code that are permitted if a conditional use permit can be granted. The applicant has been invited to attend and to make a statement if he so chooses. He will also be allowed to respond at the end of the comments. May I ask, is the applicant or anyone representing him here now and intending to make a statement? Okay. Let me finish with the introduction here, and then we'll bring you forward. After the applicant's statement has been made, we'll open the floor for public comment. As mayor, I have the discretion under the rules of council to extend our 5-minute time limit, and this is a matter that I do believe is sufficiently important to warrant my exercising that discretion, but only to the extent that the comments remain relevant to the topic and do not become repetitious. The procedural context of this matter is important to the discussion here. We have a conditional use application, and for a conditional use, we must consider 3 things and 3 things only: the effect on the village plan, the effect on the neighborhood, and the effect on traffic. If the applicant wants to make changes in the exterior of the building, he will have to apply for a certificate of appropriateness from the GPHPC, and that body can make a decision which can be appealed to council by any affected party within 30 days of the decision. So a question has been raised: why is council even considering this? The simple fact is that we are legally required to do so. Our ordinances and state law require that if the owner of a property wants to obtain a conditional use, that we, the village, must take it through a process, which is what we have been doing to date. I will also, for the record, note that several documents concerning this application have been posted on the village website. The application for the conditional use, the resolution that I just read the title of, a staff report, a community petition, and a notice of public hearing for today. With that, I'm going to invite the representative of the applicant to come forward and make a statement.
Good evening. My name is Mark Hutton of Liberty Township.
Could you speak closer to the mic, please?
Sorry about that. My name is Mark Hutton, and resident of Liberty Township, representative as a co-owner of Mimi's House with my wife Janet, as well as representative of 42 Washington LLC, the owner of 42 Washington Avenue. We're here to support the recommendation of the GPHPC that recommends approval of our conditional use application. Just wanted to add, for context, our Mimi's House is a residential assisted living home in Loveland. It is, to look at the need, it is 100% filled with a waiting list. There's always a need for senior care, and we look forward to bringing that to here if we can do that. And we're primarily here today just to answer questions for the council. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite members of the public who want to address this resolution to this application for council. I'm inviting them to come forward to the podium. If they wish, they can stand in line behind one another and just to save a place, or just come up.
Mr. Mayor, before the public speaks, you had mentioned earlier that council would have an opportunity to question the applicant. When would that be?
Well, I think
Is
the
it
applicant, the applicant's representative is here, so
Right.
council can put questions to that person.
Is this the appropriate time or when? That's my question.
No, I would like to wait until we have the public comments done, and then that's the time for council deliberations, and if there are questions, they can put them
And
to
then we come
the
back
applicant.
and question the applicant?
Yes. Okay.
My name is William Parrish. I am the founder of the Eckstein Cultural Arts Center. Most of you know me since I've been in with council, coming regularly about Eckstein School since 2015. But tonight I invited Paul Mueller, Executive Director of Cincinnati Preservation, to address council. So I'd like to use this time to invite Paul to come.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor Lofty, members of council, it's a real honor to be here as a preservationist in Glendale. Glendale is a community that takes its historic preservation very seriously. It was one of the early places that identified historic preservation as a civic obligation and benefit. National Landmark Historic Village, you're an inspiration to us all, so coming out here is great. Many of our original members from 1964 were citizens of Glendale who helped come to this ethos that we should take care of the things that are historic, that they, I'll step back low. The things that are historic have sort of a life-affirming, enriching role, and you're a perfect example of that here in the village. One thing that's happening in the preservation movement now is that we are recognizing that we haven't been telling everyone's story. It's almost on a systemic level that the preservation movement has ignored, neglected, and destroyed the sites associated with Black history. We're trying to correct that now as a movement, and there's some changed conditions that exist that didn't exist just a few years ago. There's an enormous amount of funding that's coming forward for sites of Black history. Cincinnati Preservation Association recently received a Hale Foundation grant to promote and save sites of Black history. Just today, I was on a phone call with someone, state preservation leaders. Cleveland received $500,000 for an African-American church from the National Park Service. The National Trust received a $20 million gift from Mackenzie Scott for preserving sites of Black history. So it's a completely different situation. We're trying to now realize that rather than neglecting and destroying these sites, we need to care for them and bring them into the story and tell the whole story. Cincinnati Preservationists, we would like to help in any way possible. We do a lot of work with the Hamilton County Land Bank and Port Authority in their historic building stabilization plan. And I've been talking to them about helping find a site that could be transferred for this church to be able to, or for Eckstein School, to be able to use it as an alternative location. There could be a solution out here where everyone can benefit. The senior facility could happen, and Glendale could move forward with a really important piece of its history. Just want to say thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Lofty, members of council. My name is Raymond Terrell. I currently reside at 1010 Misty Stream Drive in Springfield Township. However, I grew up at 105 Washington Avenue. I'm an alumnus of Eckstein School. A proud alumnus of Eckstein School. I'm here this evening to indicate that Eckstein School wasn't simply a school. Eckstein School was the center of culture and life for the African American community here in Glendale. It served many purposes other than simply being a school. My junior and senior prom were held in the gym at Eckstein School because of the segregation of the schools that existed here, and the community engaged in the activity of turning that gym into a wonderland for prom. It became a community activity. There were other dances, community dances, that happened frequently on that site. There were occasions for other parties and activities. There were community cakewalk and pie walks. Now, none of you are old enough to remember those events, but they occurred there as a community activity on a regular basis. The community members baked cakes and pies, and members came and raised funds, walking and in a fashion of musical chairs in order to see who would win the cake and the pie. It was a community activity that happened literally every spring and winter holiday. Every summer holiday, there was a community picnic. There was a hog roast. There were three-leg races. There were all kinds of activities that were community-based that contribute to the life of the community. Boy Scouts met here. This was where the local Boy Scouts met at Eckstein School. Most importantly, it was also the center for issue discussions. The whole movement to attempt to desegregate the schools were held at Eckstein School. Other civic issues were discussed there. The usual procedure for such discussions where they were opened with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and a recitation of the preamble to the Constitution, recited by me at 6 years old because I had remembered it then. We were a real civic-minded and community, and Eckstein School was the center of that life and that community for African Americans, then called Negro citizens of the village of Woodlawn. Therefore, I would oppose very much the change and making the total structure a historically preserved site in commemoration of the Negro life of Glendale, Ohio. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Ron Vischer. I've been a Glendale resident.
We need to speak closer to Mike, please.
Hello, my name's Ron Vischer. I've been a Glendale resident for about 40 years. I've got a set of the documents I'm going to speak from, so I'll pass it down. So the title of my first slide are, Why Are We Here? People have asked me why I'm here, and I'm here primarily because I have a lot of confidence in the process that we're pursuing, and I want to make sure that that process is an informed process. And I was unable to provide the information I had to the Glendale Planning Commission because of the time limits that they had in their decision process. And so as a result, the only time I've had an opportunity to present the information has been to Village Council, and I'm going to continue to do that. We're here today in a public hearing to discuss a conditional use application for Eckstein School. What's before Council today is a specific application that includes only the gymnasium of a building that is much more than that. And we've just had testimony that it's much, much more than that. Indeed, it's a great cultural resource. It's a wonderful historic site. And as shown in the drawing, unfortunately, this application for conditional use requires demolition of the remainder of the site besides the gymnasium. So I think it's important to look at the process we're undertaking and look at it stepwise. First, what do the Planning Commission guidelines say about the application? And the next slide points out that our Planning Commission instructs property owners to follow the Planning Commission Preservation Guidelines, which are found on our very village website. The village website connection to the Planning Commission, and the guidelines can then be downloaded. And the guidelines reference the Secretary of Interior's standard for rehabilitation pertaining to use, which state, "A property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment." The drawings in the application do not illustrate a minimal change to the property. In fact, they illustrate demolition. Next slide, please. The Eckstein building and its use as a school is historic, and its preservation is subject to overlapping regulations. It's important for the village to understand that there are layers of federal, state, and local regulations here. It's a contributing building to our National Historic Landmark. It's recognized statewide by markers as a school and for Eleanor Eckstein, and it's pre-registered nationally as a historic place and associated with the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. And there are illustrations of the plaques on that slide. Next slide. And this slide presents the general overview of the various regulations. Federal regulations require Glendale ensure historic sites are preserved and rehabilitated. Federal input in the form of guidelines are incorporated into our very own village laws, and economic incentives are provided in support of this program, and we heard that these economic incentives are increasing. Ohio regulations direct municipalities to achieve certified local government status by establishing a qualified planning commission to enforce protection legislation. And those of us who know members of the Planning Commission recognize the expertise they have and the dedication that they have and the amount of work they put into making these recommendations. And I think it's unfortunate I didn't have an opportunity to present my facts to the Planning Commission and actually had to wait until we got it to the Village Council. Glendale has a Planning Commission and village ordinances incorporating federal guidelines. We've adopted approved procedures to meet our certified local government requirements. Maintaining our national historic district status requires that we follow our ordinances and guidelines. Our ordinances for historic properties include regulations for both appropriateness and use, as you've mentioned, Mayor. And I think that's what's really important, is that as we go through this process, we recognize that not only is the end result going to be examined, but whether or not we followed our process accurately. Next slide. At the last council meeting, the application was described as a two-stage process. And in any two-stage process, the first question is to answer which stage comes first. And what's on this slide is the ordinance for appropriateness. The appropriateness ordinance states that if the owner intends to modify any exterior feature, they shall first secure a certificate for appropriateness. The ordinance also adopts the Planning Commission guidelines that contain the federal standard requiring minimal changes to a property when new uses are being considered. However, the applicant applied for a use change under a separate ordinance, perhaps to avoid the clear discussion of the federal guideline. However, our law says that if they intend to demolish, and there's no question about it from the architectural drawing, that the appropriateness guideline should be considered first. Nonetheless, we've got the Conditional Use Guideline in front of us, and that's an ordinance that we need to talk about. And the next slide has that ordinance. It's interesting that the federal standard for a new use is not discussed in the Planning Commission recommendation, even though our law doesn't exclude its consideration. There's an option there, you could include it, but it doesn't exclude that we would consider it. A required factor for conditional use approval is the effect on the neighborhood, and all the neighbors signed a petition to oppose its use as a convalescent home. The effect on the neighborhood for not following federal standards for historic preservation may also be significant. That's a decision that we need to make. And the petition was not referenced in the recommendation forwarded to council. The next factor is conformance with the village plan. The conditional use application is not in conformance with the village plan, in my opinion. On page 45, the village plan names Eckstein School as a key institutional historic resource, and on page 52 promotes preservation of these landmarks. Additionally, the action recommended is to support preservation of schools as a generic, not just their buildings. The application changes its use, not preserve its use as a school. And what I have on the slide is quotes from those village ordinances. How are we supporting the preservation of schools by converting them into convalescent homes? And why wouldn't Glendale Elementary be next? The village plan does reference a quote of one sentence in length, recognizing that future housing needs may change for our citizens. But if you read it carefully, you'll note that the sentence does not support this using a zoning change. Let me read it to you. Other housing choices may become relevant to resident needs, such as senior or assisted housing, live-work housing, and the adaptive reuse of commercial or office buildings for housing. Assisted housing is an unusual term. I Googled it, and assisted housing turns out to be financial assistance. What was interesting to me is the first two things that came up on my Google page were advertisements for assisted living. However, financial assistance refers to the kind of assistance provided by HUD or municipal housing authorities, and this is not relevant to assisted living. An adaptive reuse of commercial or office buildings doesn't require any zoning change at all. So the cited reference is not a reference relating to a zoning change, it's relating to changes in people's lives. As the representative of the owner testified that, yeah, there's a lot of need for this kind of housing. That's unambiguous. The conditional use application, however, should be rejected based on its failure to conform with the village plan. Next slide, please. So in summary, Eckstein School is important historically, statewide, and nationally. According to the Planning Commission, economic considerations should not be considered for this application, and we should properly use the required process and carefully apply the village guidelines, ordinances, and federal standards. I have confidence that when council follows the process properly, the application will be denied. I also would like to provide the council with copies of my comments from the June 28th meeting. I know that I believe it was Councilperson Duke that requested that the testimonies that were received in the June 28th meeting be included in the record of the public hearing. And so
would you hand them to the village clerk, please?
Thank you.
Next, please.
Good evening. Some of you may remember me as Frank Langendorfer. Some of you now know me as Father Max Langendorfer. I grew up here in Glendale at 350 East Sharon Avenue. I lived here in Glendale from 1950 till 1967. I attended St. Gabriel's School from 1952 to 1960. And as a student, I often went, or we went, as kids, to Eckstein School for gym classes. I had a bicycle, I sold sweet corn, I loved to explore. I knew every road and every neighborhood in Glendale. And I saw there was a great difference between North Troy and other parts of the village. I didn't understand economics or social analysis, but I could see that there was a great deal of difference in the way people lived and who people were and who was where. From 1986 to 2010, I was a missionary in southern Africa in the country of Malawi, and in East Africa in Kenya, as well as 10 other countries. So I lived in dictatorships, and I saw a great effect of the colonial structures on people. I also worked in Malawi from 2010 to 2017, which was a British colony, and a sugar plantation area where you had very much the same social structure today as was there in the 1600s. Recently, I visited the Charlestown Landing Historical Site in Charleston, South Carolina. It's the place where the first European settlers landed in 1670. There's a really good museum there which shows the social structure of a colony. It shows the role of the London proprietors who basically financed the colony, for the role of the plantation administrators, the indentured servants, and the African slaves. It also showed how the colony was related to the British colonies in Barbados, which resulted in the deforestation of South Carolina and the export of American Indians as slaves.
Sir, excuse me, you are going to have to bring this into Glendale pretty quickly.
Okay, so Eckstein School offers the perfect site to show the relationship of the U.S. Ohio Valley economic social structure to the village residents and how this village came to be, the relationship to the industrialist and to the servants and to the Irish immigrants. It's a place that can be just like the Charlestown Historical Site in showing how people lived and what the social conditions were. And so I highly recommend this school be turned into a historical and educational institution.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brenda Daniels, and I live at 79 Washington Avenue. A lot of the things I had planned to say have already been said, and since the mayor asked us not to be repetitive, then I will try not to be repetitive, but I do want to bring something to your attention. I work with the Princeton City School District, and several years ago, Princeton built brand new schools throughout the Princeton City School District. And when Princeton came to Glendale, Glendale said, "You do not touch Glendale Elementary School. It is a historical site." I want you to know that's how we feel about Eckstein School. We want you as a council to say no to this planning commission, to this assisted living, because we love that building. We have watched it decay, but we have tried on several avenues to get some kind of, Bill Parrish has tried to get Glendale, when you all had the building, to turn it over to us in some way so it could be used effectively, so that it could be used the way it was intended to be used. So we're asking you, as the neighbors in that community living on that street, if you come up and down our street, we have signs that say, "Save Eckstein School," because we want our schools saved. We know that you are we are your constituents. You are here because of us. We voted for you, and we have entrusted into you that you will do what it is that we desire, not an outsider who comes in and buys up a piece of property and wants to make a profit. We want you to listen to us. We love Glendale, and it's been a hard road. You know, we've come a long way, but we have worked together. So let's stay together and let's do something good for Glendale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jill Binzer. I live at 72 Washington, across the street from Brenda. And first off, I just want to say the speakers before me have been awesome. I've enjoyed listening to you. Wonderful. Diana Torin could not be here tonight. She lives catty corner to Eckstein School. And she asked me to read this message that she prepared. And I'm honored to read this in her absence. Good evening, council, neighbors, and guests. This tug of war over Eckstein School should not have occurred. Let's remember why we are here today. Some of us didn't work together for the community as was promised, but that was then, this is now. Let's work together now. It can still be done. Glendale is a community, a village of connected people who care for one another. We should be on the same side of humanity, the same side of this issue. In years to come, when everyone recalls this moment in time, when you look in the mirror and dig down in your heart of hearts, you're going to have to live with the decision you made. Did you make it with the people you serve in mind? Up until now, some of you on council and on the historical committee have chosen a different path regarding Eckstein School, or we would have been enjoying it as a community building today and not here still discussing its fate. Now is your chance to do what is right, to keep promises that were given, to secure votes, to preserve history even when it is not your own, to make Glendale a better community for all. Let us stop this negative energy and madness. Let's work together for the betterment of our community. Please save Eckstein School. And I just want to say personally, I'm not as eloquent as she is, and I agree with everything that she said. So thank you for listening to us tonight.
Thank you.
Right place. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Libby Hamrick, and I reside at 136 West Sharon Road. My early childhood was spent in a house on Springfield Pike across from what is now Maple Knoll Village. At that time, it was just a large field with the hospital further north on the property. I could stand in my front yard and see across the field to the end of Washington Avenue. Little did I know I was looking at my future neighborhood. My parents moved to our house in Glendale at 715 Woodbine Avenue during my late teens and college years. I was married in that house, and I have many fond memories of Glendale. I did move to Kansas City after I was married, and that's where I raised my family. I met my current partner, Charlie Pierce, and we both decided that we wanted to return to Glendale. We moved back in the spring of 2016. Soon after that, we reconnected with Bill Parrish, and he asked if we would like to be involved in his pursuit to acquire Eckstein School for his nonprofit organization, Eckstein Cultural Arts Center. We said yes, and began attending committee meetings and council meetings pertaining to the project. It quickly became apparent to me that each time Bill presented information requested of him by the committee or the council, that he was then given further requirements to fulfill to obtain access to Eckstein School. This went on for many months, as most of you know, until it suddenly was announced that the school would be put up for bid. Our group of ECAC board members were taken aback by this, but thought enough evidence had been provided that the project would move forward. Fast forward to today. ECAC obviously did not obtain access to the Eckstein School, and it now belongs to an outside entity who wishes to demolish the building, or at least the historical part of the building, which is the original house in the back. A native son who was ready, willing, and able to preserve the Eckstein School was right in front of all of you, and you chose to let it fall into the hands of someone who has done nothing in over 2 years. This is a village that prides itself on being historic-minded, but I think what is clear now is that that means white history, not black history. We can see that in the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on the police station and the fire station. Both of those projects are great. But where is that same pride in keeping the Eckstein School in good condition all these years that you've had it? I say to you, council members, tonight, you and your predecessors had the opportunity to extend the same amount of pride to the Eckstein School as you did to the fire and police stations, but you chose to wash your hands of this historic building. So shame on you. Shame on each and every one of you for letting that happen.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Erica Brenner. As I've stated before, I'm not a resident of Glendale, but I've been a participant in the village of Glendale since my children have gone to school at St. Gabe's. I also have a personal interest in relation to the property that is currently Eckstein School. I want to express my concern against the potential destruction of a portion of the property in order to build a new facility. As I've stated before, my husband and our family have a personal tie to the home as it is the original Verdon homestead, and my husband is a direct descendant. Aloysius Nicholas Verdon, his wife Barbara, and their 7 children moved to Glendale and that home at 42 Washington Avenue in 1887. It's been there for quite a while. They had 2 more children while living there, bringing the total to 9 raised in that home. At least 2 of the older children purchased homes and became Glendale residents, one on Church and one at 21 Washington, with that family and their descendants living there for generations until 2006. After the death of her husband, Barbara sold the home with the provision that this property would become a school in order to educate children. When that transformation from home to school took place, yes, the original building was altered. They took the front porch off, a bay window in the front, the entrance was changed, and of course the gymnasium was added. My point on this is they kept the original bones of the home and added to it, utilizing a sound structure instead of tearing most of it down to make it fit their needs as a traditional school. I have walked through the building, I have seen the peeling paint and the water in the basement, so I get the issues that are there. I have also seen the incredible and solid woodwork that is still intact, and the doors and knobs that people would fight over right now in order to replace missing pieces in their historic homes. I know how big the rooms are, and I can honestly see how if this was made into a new facility, they could be incorporated into day rooms and offices for the staff. There is a way to use what is there and build on it without taking away. I cannot speak personally for the use of the building after it was sold by the Verdon family, but the people in this room can, as that is their legacy and their history, and it is no less important than our personal ties to it. They want to see it preserved for many of the same reasons that I do, and you should not discard them. This country is so hell-bent on tearing things down in the name of progress, only to regret it later and realize that we lost a piece of history that cannot be replaced. It might not be a national monument, but in their eyes it is. There is a marker outside of the building designating the historic significance. Why would it make sense then to alter that building? The city of Cincinnati has one of the largest districts of Italianate architecture in the country, and film crews flock here to use it because it looks like New York and Chicago at the turn of the century. They stopped tearing buildings down in OTR because they realized they needed to save what was here. If you walk around parts of Europe today, for example in Munich, it looks exactly like OTR because they built what looked like home. Germany and other European countries don't tear their buildings down. They find ways to save them and keep using what is frankly built better than what gets built today. You as a village keep people from altering homes because you want the village to look a certain way. There's obviously a pattern here. The only reason the developers want to tear everything down except the gym is for their convenience, because it's the least amount of mess to clean up. They don't care about the history and the designation of the buildings in the village. They only see a plot of land and dollar signs. I wondered about why the building fell into disrepair. I know that it was used as storage by Princeton School District for a time, and that the village owned it and stored items there as well. Why in all of that time did no one take the time to do occasional cleanups? I bet if you had asked the community to pitch in, these residents would have given their time and energy to do so. But no one ever did, and now it looks like it does. I would venture a guess in that all of the damage could have been prevented had steps been taken years ago. Why would a pro-historic village not take the time to make sure that one of its key structures was maintained? Regardless of who owned it when, it should have been kept up for all these years, and maybe we wouldn't be here tonight arguing over this matter. The whole premise of the Village of Glendale is to provide a place that holds onto and honors the history of the community. Look at how many other buildings around town have been converted to a different use while maintaining the structure of what has always been there. Your village square is a perfect example. From train station to museum, homes to restaurants, a Masonic hall to shops, and even your own village hall. Everywhere you look around the village, there is a plaque or marker stating what the building used to be, the significance, or how long a house has been there in the village. The Verdon, Hafferteep, and Brenner home at 21 Washington even has one. Yet you are considering the idea of letting someone change that, defeating the very thing you fight so hard for. This council and your historic preservation team go to great lengths to keep homes, streets, businesses, and buildings looking like they have been here for 100 years, and you do a great job. I know there are times when that cannot take place. You have a UDF, it's brand new. It doesn't look like anything else in the village, but it fits with the vibe of the village. However, I believe in this case you can. Please do not allow this home and school to be desecrated, torn down, and wiped away like it never mattered. It belongs here in its entirety as a reminder of what was, no different than this hall we are standing in tonight. Thank you.
Further, anyone else? Yeah. Oh.
Good evening. My name is Ruth Ann Johnson Thomas. I am also an alumni of Eckstein School. When Eckstein was auctioned off in 2009, I was present and I bid on it. Everyone that bid on that building was outbid by Glendale, and now I'm asking you for what?
One of my neighbors asked me to speak. I've lived here a long time, and I have living in a very historic old house, and I've been part of other work around the village to maintain what we have. And I was absolutely appalled to find out that this school was going to be not only sold, but damaged. That is dead wrong. We have so many people in the village related to that school, just like Glendale School, just like the other schools. And it's up to us to really take much better care of it. I don't know how you're going to figure that out, because you already have, plans to sell it, but I'd like to be on the committee that works on it, because it belongs to our community, and we have other places that don't. So that's my story, and I'll tell you plenty of it, because I helped with the plaquing of that building. And incidentally, the words on the plaque were written by a couple of the graduates. So read it.
Kevin Parrish, 176 Washington Avenue, third generation Glendalian. In 2009, I solicited for Glendale to buy the Extime School back after I talked with the Princeton Board of Education, and they said you had no interest in it. In 2010, when you allowed black residents to participate in the wording on the plaque, and then in the meeting after they had decided on the correct wording, you brought in a white historian where you had many students that had attended that school still living there. I told them at that meeting that you had no interest in preserving this school, and that if they didn't keep an eye on you, they would be looking at a plaque on an empty lot. It seems like we've almost arrived at that point in time. Mayor Lofty, you ran on a campaign promise to the black community that you would help us save Extime School. The election was so close that they did a recount, but you survived that. Yet you have did nothing, and the village of Glendale has done nothing to preserve this historic site in reference to black significance in this community. I understand. They might not understand, but I understand that being in an abolitionist community developed by abolitionists, the first planned community in the United States, doesn't sit good with white folks. It's not popular for white folks to help black folks in injustices. So I understand that. That's why I display this sign, because without addressing the racism, then we can't go forward as a community. Without diversity, you can't be as much as you should be. You try to erase the fact that blacks do not make contributions, but everything we've been allowed to participate in, we have made contributions with. I wonder what would happen if we boycotted basketball and football. What would you watch? You discredit us on a continuous basis, and yet our families that live here, we're the workforce for the big houses. We're grateful for the opportunity to live in such a community where we didn't notice the level of racism that existed here because of the opportunities that were afforded for us and our families. And I grew up and went to the Princeton School District. I didn't go to Extime, and was afforded a great education, and I took advantage of that. But you don't see that. What you see is a black man, and blackness is intimidating to you, especially privileged people. But in making the not so sound decisions that you make in this community, you need to understand that you jeopardize the national historic status in this community by keep destroying our artifacts. You already tore down Mount Zion and the Patronage, and now here you are with the school. Ever since you touched the park, which was the black park, you brought nothing but destruction, and yet you don't see anything wrong with your actions. We used to have fruit and flowers in the park without any contribution from you guys, because when you cut the grass when we were using the park, we could make hay snowman. The point I want to make is that without honesty and transparency in our elected council members and the lack of morality in your decision-making, then you jeopardize the very existence of this National Historic Community. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak?
Good evening. My name is Leslie Cooper, and I'm just here as a Glendale resident tonight. There's 2 points that I would like to bring up to council just to note in the notes. The first note is that 2 people on the Historic Preservation Commission voted against the conditional use of X9, 42 Washington. And also note that 1 person on Glendale Historic Preservation Council voted against the resolution. And also, I would like to acknowledge Ray Turrell. He's not just Ray Turrell, he is Dr. Raymond Turrell. He taught at University of California for many years. He taught at Miami, and he was the former mayor of Woodlawn, Ohio. Thank you.
Is anybody else? Okay.
My name is Carlos Reed. I live at 1125 Church Avenue. Been there my entire life, 68
Could you speak closer to the microphone, please?
I'm Carlos Reed. I've been at 1125 Church Avenue since 1953. So I've been there my entire life. Okay, I sit there and look at this as far as like Eckstein is concerned. The lack of people wanting to preserve Eckstein is a cultural marker for the people that went there. But then again, I see these signs out here for John Hunt Morgan Trail, who was a Confederate officer that came north of the river looking to repatriate slaves or black people back south. He did not capture anyone that was of color, but he burned and he pillaged. You understand? We got signs throughout the village marking where he went. Okay? You go down there to the Glendale Heritage Museum, and you see a Confederate uniform in there. Not a Union uniform, a Confederate uniform. Okay, so this is how Glendale praises everything else except for what is good for the community. That's all I want to say, because it's unbelievable.
Hi, I'm Paul Breidenbach. I live at 171 Washington Avenue since 1996. I met Bill when I was collecting interviews with residents of Glendale about the racial history of the village, including long interviews with his father, who is much more angry, was much more angry than Bill is. Bill has a project that involves reconciliation, involves taking what is the only, what according to a historical society member of Ohio, is the only monument to segregation in Ohio, and turning that into a project to reconcile a village, not just a village, but a region, that regardless of how we feel in our hearts about race, we have to realize that it is a monument to a difficult time and evidence of structural racism. And the project that I hope we can all unite behind, that is Bill's project, is an attempt to reconcile and to heal from that. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, would you kindly remind the speakers to introduce themselves? I'm not hearing their names.
Okay.
I'm taking notes and I'm not
Most of
either.
them have, but okay.
I'm
yes.
Melissa Smith. I'm a resident. I live immediately next to Eckstein. And on a couple different occasions have hacked down that bush honeysuckle with other neighbors. So things have done, but not organized in such to keep it up. I just came up to point out that, as listed on those little signs, Eckstein School stayed in operation, and segregation of schools in Glendale lasted longer than was legally, Brown versus Board of Education came out 4 years or so before Eckstein closed. However, I don't believe that Glendale is, or America is, a racist place, but I do think Eckstein should be saved. Thank you.
Anybody else? At this point, I will invite the representative of the applicant to come forward if there's any further points that he would like to make.
Good evening. My name's Denny Dellinger. I'm an architect. I live at 228 Mohawk Street in Over the Rhine. I first got involved with this project just about 3 years ago when a client of mine told me that they were planning to purchase or had purchased a property, the Eckstein School in Glendale, and asked me to come out and look at it. And I did. I thought it was a great opportunity. I think Glendale's a great place, and how could they go wrong investing in trying to preserve this building? Well, they declined to pursue the project, and I said, well, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it, because I wanted to preserve the building. I spent over 2 years developing plans, several sets of plans, and I applied to the state historical preservation officer for historic tax credits. But because I really never had a good handle on project cost or a financing plan that was really viable, I never was successful in obtaining historic tax credits. And then coronavirus came along, and it seemed like a real bad time to be planning something that depended on gathering people together. So I started looking at other plans and other options, none of which were approvable by the zoning code. And around the end of last year, I decided enough's enough. I can't do this. I'm going to put it up for sale. And after a 3-month listing period and over 60 showings and over 100 inquiries, there were no offers. There was one offer that came in after the listing expired that was unreasonable and unacceptable. But in that time that it was for sale, I did a more careful study of the Glendale zoning code and historic code or preservation guidelines, and found that a nursing home or a convalescent home was a permitted conditional use in that zone. And I knew Mark and Janet through other associations, and I knew of their success with Mimi's house in Glendale, and I called them up and said, hey, guess what I just discovered? I think we can do a residential adult living center or living home in Glendale according to their zoning code. And they said, wow, that's great. We were just thinking, where are we going to do our next one? And over the time that we've talked, I've become to really believe in this residential adult living home concept where we'd have a maximum of 16 residents and 4 caregivers, which is a way better situation than you get in a typical nursing home. So, it was never my intention to try to demolish the building or destroy the architectural heritage and the community input, a lot of which I had no clue of. I heard a lot more history today than I've learned in the past couple of years about Glendale. But I believed at the time that it was the only option that could be economically viable to preserve at least a significant portion of the building. And that's why we requested the certificate of appropriateness. Any questions?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
In your plan, or in Mark's plan,
Are you truly considering tearing down the house?
Yes.
Okay. Why?
Because an residential adult living home needs to be on a single level. There are 5 levels to that house. I did prepare plans to see how we could make it fit within the existing structure. And a 5-stop elevator is not something that you want to have in an adult living home for people that have mobility issues.
Well, are you aware that we, as a council, rejected a school here in Glendale just a year and a half ago that wanted to tear down their rectory, and we said they weren't allowed to do that? Are you?
I don't know that. I don't know about that.
Are you aware that if there's any destruction of a historic part of Glendale, that you're going to have problems with the neighbors?
Well, sir, I've worked in a lot of communities, and change is something that most people really don't like very much.
And you're in one right now that doesn't like any change. I mean, what I'm concerned with, does the application? I'm going to ask Beth and over here. Does that application include the demolition of the building? Could you speak so softly?
Beth Sullerberger, member of the Glendale Planning and Historic Preservation Commission. The application that you have before you tonight is just conditional use under the zoning code. We're not considering the certificate of appropriateness or the demolition at this time. So it's not part of tonight's agenda.
I have a follow-up question, if I may, Beth, before you depart.
Yes.
What good is the permit without having the approval to demolish the building?
The certificate of appropriateness will be considered separately, and you're right, it wouldn't be appropriate to review a certificate of appropriateness for a use that is not allowed. So that is why we're considering first, is this use acceptable?
My question, though, is even if the use were acceptable, it could not be executed without demolishing the building, and this is being clear up front. Why issue the use?
Not being cleared up front. It is entirely possible that if you decide that a convalescent home is an appropriate use in a residential district, that when the certificate of appropriateness comes before the Planning Commission, that the Planning Commission could deny the certificate of appropriateness.
Then what good is the permit issued for conditional use, Beth? I'm really asking in all earnestness, if this permit were issued and the Planning Commission subsequently denied the appropriateness, what good is the permit?
Well, this is the legal
Does the
process. This is the legal process that we're required to go through. There are different issues and they have different criteria. And the criteria for considering a conditional use have to do with the effect on the neighborhood, compliance with the village plan, and traffic impact. And those are the only 3 criteria that you are being asked to consider tonight in connection with the conditional use. And that is what the Planning Commission also had to evaluate. And I just want to add that 3 or 4 members of the commission actually, on our own time, went to Mimi's house in Loveland to see it for ourselves. And it was in an upscale, single-family neighborhood, And looking at it from the street, you would never know that it was a convalescent home. So it certainly seemed to be a compatible use in a residential neighborhood.
Speaking of our process, Section 154.46 of the Glendale Code speaks to appropriateness, and it's been pointed out earlier that when the owner of a contributing building, and there's no question that the Eckstein School building is a contributing building.
Agree.
Intends to alter or demolish any exterior architectural feature of such building, they shall first apply for and secure a certificate of appropriateness.
Yes.
Did Mr. Dillinger first apply for this certificate of appropriateness before applying for the conditional use?
If
I'm
I
not
could jump in
aware
here,
of any-
if I could jump in here for a moment. If that were to say, if the owner intends to apply for a conditional use, they need to do that, then that would be correct. They would have to go get the COA first. But here, we're not applying for the certificate of appropriateness. When that applicant intends to and does want to seek alteration or demolition, yes, they shall apply for the certificate. Right now, before the council is simply the conditional use is what they're seeking. And if they were to approve, if you were to approve it, that would give the applicant absolutely no authority to alter the building. They would be bound by exactly what they have right now. So they've got to keep that in mind, that this approval is highly limiting to them in that regard, and that anything additional that they would want to do would be bound by the certificate of appropriateness procedure.
So, Beth, I think you have answered my question. He did not apply for the certificate of appropriateness.
Not yet, no.
Okay, it's a different question. What the solicitor is arguing is an interpretation of the Glendale Code. I'm asking if the Planning Commission did receive his application for a certificate of appropriateness.
No.
Okay, that's one point. Thank you. The other question is, did the Planning Commission consider the state and federal guidelines for changing and substantially altering this historic building? Or did the Planning Commission simply consider the Glendale Code in section whatever it is, which calls for consideration of impact on the community, traffic, and consistency with the village plan? Was the state requirements and guidelines considered? Were they considered? And were the federal guidelines considered?
The criteria that we considered in evaluating the conditional use were in accord with the zoning code section 154.62. They are the three criteria that I mentioned. The other guidelines and standards that you're referring to are in a different section of our zoning code and relate to the certificate of appropriateness. So no, we did not consider those guidelines in evaluating the conditional use, but we will when we evaluate the certificate of appropriateness if that application is made.
I won't keep arguing the point. I hear your responses and I appreciate your responses. Not that I'm agreeing with them or the process, but I do appreciate your responses. Lastly, Beth, I would like to ask you, what is the value of the historic marker in front of the building if the building were demolished?
What is the value of the marker? I think that the value of the marker is the same It informs the public about the historic significance of the building.
Which is not there.
If the building were not there, as is very often the case, historic markers let people know what once existed there. It's not unusual for markers to signify the history that is associated with a place rather than a building. And, well, that's enough.
Well, that is interesting because I'm curious and would like to hear what was considered. How was that marker obtained? It is certainly historically significant. What process did you and the Planning Commission and the village go through to put that marker there?
I personally didn't have any involvement in that. I believe it was under Mayor Hoop, and I heard some people here tonight say that Eckstein School graduates contributed to the text, but I had no involvement in that. I don't think the Planning Commission did either.
Would you come to the
You
mic?
got to come to the microphone, please.
Sorry about that. I'm Carol Muntz, and I live down on Sharon Road. Ralph decided, and I'm not exactly sure what prompted him, and I was sort of hoping he was going to be here tonight, but he decided that the marker should be placed in front of that building. And he got a group of graduates to come and participate in that. That's how 2 people did the words for it. But when we had this meeting, and the council sat on one end of the table and the graduates were at the other end. And this man from the Columbus insisted that it says Negro School. Well, he insisted that that was not used anymore, and so we shouldn't put that on the sign. And we talked back and forth and everything. And then finally, I leaned across the table and I said, "Are you listening to us?" And the council kind of stirred, but the graduates murmured. And it was powerful. It's the right thing to do. And there was a huge group of people that came to the celebration of it and took pictures and everything. That building belongs to Glendale. That's part of our history.
All right, so what I'm trying to find out is, and you've partly answered it, there was a state agency, a state official, somebody from the state of Ohio at that ceremony and involved in erecting that marker. I just don't know what office, what agency,
Well, I think
what
it
the
was,
standards were.
I think it was, look, I'm old and it was a while back.
Connie Pillage helped us with the name Negro on there. They wanted to put African American. We said no. Connie Pillage got involved, and it came down to Negro on that plaque.
And that fellow from the historic organization in Columbus was also.
Yes.
He came down and harassed us about that.
But he didn't win.
He didn't win.
So
And here
what-
we are to tell you.
Yes.
Beth, do you have any idea, based on your experience with historic preservation, what office in Columbus, Ohio, would be involved in approving the erection of an historic marker?
Yes, it
in
would
front of
be
that
the
building?
Ohio Historic Connection, formerly the Ohio Historical Society.
It's a historical marker, not a historical building. Is that how they interpreted
Yes, it's a historical marker.
Ohio
And,
Historical Society.
Not a historical
Yes,
building.
but
And
it's known today as the Ohio History Connection.
And is the building listed as an historic or contributing or pivotal building in the state of Ohio?
Well,
I
I'm
know- we
glad
know
you
it is
asked
for
that.
Glendale.
I'm glad you asked that. Because until a few years ago, no 20th century buildings were considered to be pivotal. They were considered to be background buildings, and they weren't specifically identified as contributing. I wrote a extensive amendment to the National Register nomination for the Glendale Historic District to extend the period of significance to 1960 to include, specifically include 20th century buildings as contributing to the character of the district. And there is a section in that amendment that deals with African American history in Glendale, and specifically includes the history of Eckstein. And so because of that amendment that I wrote, Eckstein is identified as a contributing building in the National Register District.
So the answer to my question is yes, the building is listed as a contributing.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I did that knowing that it would enable federal and state tax credits to be available for the rehabilitation of the building.
I didn't want to respond until Beth said something about the amended.
Would you
time.
remind us who you are?
I'm Bill
sorry.
Parrish.
Thank you.
I didn't want to say anything because of this long, arduous process that we've been through on this historic preservation piece, largely that I've gone on in trying to partner with the village of Glendale, and they didn't want to partner. Now, we discussed at length the fact that Eckstein School didn't come before 1900 in terms of how the village recognized it. And that was part of the problem, was that recognizing Eckstein School in 1915 versus 1887, when the Verdon House was actually built. That was a real problem. Now, in 1900, all the records that Mount Zion Church had were burned. There was no records. So we were discussing how we could address this from a civil rights standpoint. Keep in mind that at this time I've already written a book called An Underground Community, How Blacks Settled in the Village of Glendale. And we were looking at 1900 to 1960s as amending the timeline to get support and other structures, all of the structures on the black side of Glendale. But what the village wanted to consider after I had already done the pre-nomination of the Eckstein School was to get white structures on there as well. So they solicit me to work with Beth because she didn't have the history of Glendale and the black community. Meanwhile, the village had gotten a grant for $11,000 to do this work, and I discussed it with them, and they were going to offer me $1,000 to use my portion of the history that I had spent 8 months researching, and I didn't understand why they would just offer me $1,000 when they were getting $11,000, but I declined at that. But fast forward, they used my information. They used the information that I didn't give them permission to use, and they went through the process of getting that information to the state.
Bill, excuse me, but we are getting a little far afield here.
Well, I just wanted to clarify what
Okay.
what Beth said. Can I do that?
because I think when you're lying, then it's important to clarify that that is not exactly what happened, and let people know that the village has not been in the process of trying to save this building.
Okay, please
And
wrap
then-
it up quickly then.
Have I used 5 minutes?
Would you just please?
Have I used 5 minutes?
As I said-
Everybody else has got an opportunity to say what they have to say, so
Okay.
can I finish
Bill,
what I'm saying?
yes, finish.
Okay. Now, I've told you before, I don't come here to disrespect council. I just come here to say something when things are not right and you can't sit there and take it. So here's what's going on. Because Eckstein School is significant because of its history that goes back to 1863 with Eleanor Eckstein, then it's more significant than just the 1926 sign on it and those plaques out there. The real issue here is the history that is behind Eckstein School and where all of that came from. And we want to address it from conditional use standpoint, but we don't want to deal with the history of what has happened in the process that I've been in since 2015, 6 years now. I've been in this process with the village. And consistently, they haven't partnered with us to try to get this right. Now it's all awry, and we still don't want to sit down and understand how we can correct this.
Bill, I appreciate the history that you've uncovered and revealed. Is there, and because the history of the building is so important, can you direct us to a site, a website, or someplace where that history is recapped chronologically? We're focusing so much here on the segregated schooling that occurred in the mid-20th century or so, that I am losing sight of the chronology of the historical significance of that building from the time it was a house
I
owned
have-
by...
I have all of that because the state required it when I did the preliminary nomination for it to get on the National Register, with the understanding that I would get the school. So I have all of that. I have the chronology. That's what they asked me for to get that designation.
And that is what is in Columbus, Ohio?
Yes, I have it all. If you want it, I can give you
But it is
all of it, more than you want.
The chronology would be very helpful because we are using the word historical building as if it's just the spelling of those two words, when there is substance behind that and there is state involvement behind it.
Yes, but
And
Columbus
it's more
has
than
been.
just the action of this council.
Look, the Columbus has been very involved with this. I did all the research and got it preliminarily nominated. We had a conference call. I had a conference call with Alan Horweiler and Mayor Lofty in his office. We talked about all of this. So that history, they called and just confirmed it all, congratulating us and all of that sort of stuff. So why we're talking about all of this other stuff, I don't understand it, when the history of that is all intact, and everything that we did, all they had to do is give me the school, and we could get on the National Register, and we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. But because of all that's happened, they've lost sight of the fact that there's some great history way before, 100 and some years before Eckstein School. And so we got to address that, because to come and knock a school down that is significant like that, and the most significant building is still there, how do you get conditional use from that? That doesn't make sense at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is going to have to be very short, Beth.
This will be short. I don't take kindly to being called a liar. I think that's very inappropriate. And the history of Eckstein School is in the nomination is based on other sources in addition to Bill's book, all with citations. And if you would like to know more about the chronology of the building, it's in the National Register Amendment, which I can provide, and the office has a copy as well.
Okay, I have heard enough on this subject. Bill, I don't want to hear any more on this subject.
This is not going to be towards that. It's not going to be towards that. I just want to say that we had a meeting when the state of Ohio came down in the council chambers after we were doing all this work on an amended thing where the council had, where the idea was, let's do this, but here's white structures in the building as well. I disagree with that. So I disagree with the white structures being in the village. But as they were making the presentation, I said, that looks like my work. I said, that looks like my work that you guys are presenting without asking my permission. And I looked at
Okay,
at
you're
Beth,
getting back
and I
into
asked
that
her-
area, Bill.
I asked her, I said, is that my work? She said, we used it anyway. That's
Okay.
what she said.
That's
Okay,
it.
so thank you. I'm really interested in the content, and I think we can be,
Okay. Okay,
That was to the conditional use. I was at the Glendale Planning and Historic Preservation Commission meeting when Denny and Mimi's house presented their plan. Before they voted to forward this for approval to council, they were well aware of the demolition that they were going to perform, removing everything but the gym. They still approved it for conditional use. So I think that in having prior knowledge of their intent should have played a major part in their denial of the conditional use.
okay. Unless there's something really new to say, well, I'm going to let Mr. Dellinger finish, because as the applicant, he has a right to conclude, and if he wishes to say more, he is welcome to do so. And then we're going to turn this over to council for some deliberation. We probably won't get done with it tonight, because we've got some other things on the agenda, but we'll see. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't really have a whole lot more to say. If anybody else has questions, I'll answer them, but I would like to say that you know, my intention originally was to restore the building because I respect the history and I respect the community, and I worked diligently to try to find a way to do that that would be economically justifiable. The grants and programs that are available now weren't available 2 or 3 years ago. They weren't even talked about. And now Paul Mueller has a potential solution that I think is brilliant, that if I could find another site that I could build this facility similar to what we're proposing to do without the historic site to deal with, and then perhaps another organization could develop and renovate the Eckstein building for some other use. But my concern is I own the property. I have legal rights to benefit from that ownership. And so far, that hasn't been discussed or recognized at all. So, unless there's any other questions?
yes, Denny, on your application, I'm looking at your application, and it says,
Sorry.
okay, select all that apply. And I noticed that you did not check furnace or AC or interior alteration or driveway or electrical. I'm just wondering why these areas were
I
not
filled
checked.
out the application in conversation with David. I believe I followed all the instructions and checked the appropriate boxes. I don't remember exactly what you're referring to.
Here. Okay. This is your application, and look at this section here. Wouldn't that entail a new furnace, new AC, electrical, and several of these
Marilyn,
other
we can't
boxes?
hear you. And
There are additional items on here like furnace, interior alteration, new building, pool, retaining wall. I checked fence, roof, I don't know, what the heck?
I don't know, that's why I was asking you. All right, you can look at that later, but I was bringing his attention to his application submitted to the village, and the project description has a number of boxes to be checked, and several of these boxes were not checked, and I was just curious as to why not, such as a furnace, interior alteration, electrical, AC, etc. And Mr. Dillinger will revisit that on his own.
Well, I kind of assumed, I guess, that when I said new building, it was all-inclusive.
Well, that's not
Well,
checked either.
I'll resubmit the application
Well,
if you want me
I
to, and
don't
check
know.
all the boxes you think I should check.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to conclude the public portion of this testimony, except to the extent council would like to pose questions. And I would like to just see if council would like to make some preliminary comments. I kind of doubt that we're going to get to a vote tonight, but I don't know. Does anybody from council want to weigh in?
We're voting on conditional use, not
It's on the
conditional
conditional
appropriateness.
use,
There's
not
nothing to
on
do with conditional
appropriateness,
appropriateness,
not
correct?
on demolition.
Well, I think that when each council person vote, they can express themselves. I do not segregate a worthless permit being issued without some consideration of appropriateness, and that was not done in this instance. And moreover,
Marilyn, that's never done.
well, Alan, excuse me. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm also seeking additional information on the historical significance of this building and what we are losing if we go down the road that may lead to having it demolished.
I'd like to hear from some other council members.
Can I ask, why was appropriateness, why is that being looked at separately from conditional use? Why wasn't it looked at all at the same time? That might be a question for Beth, for Ms. Sullenberger, or David. It seems like they should be connected.
They will be, or they are, but for the purposes of this review, because conditional use, and it's been explained previously, Ms. Ryan covered it, because conditional use is held to different standards than certificates of appropriateness, it is two different legal processes that the village goes through. So a conditional use approval requires a review and recommendation by the Planning Commission, which is then forwarded to council for their review and final vote whether to approve with conditions, or disapprove. Certificates of appropriateness exist solely within the Planning Commission. So the certificate of appropriateness review and the conditional use approval, while for this property one would be required for the other. I mean, you're not going to just get, as it's been said before, that it would be a useless conditional use because if you can't make changes to the property. That's not necessarily the complete picture, because there are options to make change or make this property function under that use. However, for the purposes of this review, it's simply a review of the approval of the use itself before we make any structural changes, before any structural changes are applied for. So is this an applicable use for this property as a conditional use? Does it meet those three requirements, which are separate from the the COA, the Certificate of Appropriateness? So it's a muddy process, but it is two separate avenues that applications are taken down.
And because because the certificate of appropriateness does not come to council unless on appeal, I guess the idea here was that use itself could run through the entire village process of Planning Commission and then council for review. And then once council had an opportunity to weigh in on the use as the code requires, then you can go back with the certificate of appropriateness that only, for whatever reason in your code, goes just to Planning Commission. and they have the opportunity to review that, having the knowledge of how the use was evaluated by both bodies before they go through the process of the details of how the building might be altered or whether it should be altered or anything like that. Just with all these different types of zoning approvals, they all have different processes. In your circumstances with the zoning code, COAs and conditional uses just have a different process. And none of that is clearly defined, but that was the process that the applicant chose to take.
And the conditional use applies to the property as it exists, whereas the certificate of appropriateness would apply to the proposal that the applicant brings forward. So because you have to obtain conditional use approval for this conditional use in order to pursue that use, that would logically need to be reviewed prior to any structural changes to the building, because that review of those structural changes is entirely dependent on whether the use itself is approved.
And I could be wrong here, but I think it's also a cost consideration. The idea to go through with the basic parameters and scope of the type of use that you might consider for that site is one thing, but to come forward with engineering plans or economic justifications for demo or any kind of more significant details, that's a much more involved process. Has a lot more burden of proof than just simply giving basic scope and having the benefit of another Mimi's house to explain that use. So I think that was also probably played into the recommended path and process here, so that part of the process would only be pursued and expended if this first step was fulfilled.
And Mr. Dellinger, a question for you, just on your, it's shown here that you would demolish the original house. You've already said you have to take down that part to make this viable.
And I want to make it clear that I wanted to make sure there was no notion of misrepresenting intentions or anything. That's why I presented what I did.
Okay, and
because we had determined that was the only reasonable way that we could make this project work on that property.
Which leads to my question. So you're an architect, you've worked with old buildings.
Yep.
I've been in the building several times, and I tried to work with Mr. Parrish early on costing for reconstruction and that sort of thing. And with respect to handicap access, which is probably a step beyond convalescent home and access for those people. We had considered ramping and all various things so that people could move around within the structure itself. Now, granted, there is a second story, and no amount of ramping will get you up there short of an elevator, okay? But from memory and from seeing the drawing again, and probably wouldn't even need to see the drawing, I've been in there so many times, it seems the entire first floor could be converted for use. It would possibly cost more than leveling the building itself. But it seems to me that that entire first floor could be converted for use. And then the second story obviously would then have to be storage, staff office, something like that. Is there any way you could make it work that way? And I'll go beyond what a lot of people here in the room may know, which is there are a couple of back sections that probably would fall outside of the original structure attached to the back. They're not a part of the original house, but I'm not as concerned about that as the original house. So is there some way you can creatively with your architecture or yeah, but making it, yeah, Escher could draw anything too, right?
Yeah.
So is there some way you can make that first floor work? And working with what was brought up by, and I'm sorry, the gentleman here from the Cincinnati Historical Society, work some way with tax credits and try to meet this halfway or partway?
Well, that's a complicated question.
It is.
I wouldn't even attempt to apply for historic tax credits with those kind of alterations in mind.
All right.
I don't think I'd get them. I don't think it'd be worth it to go through the effort.
Okay, so it would
I
be just
really think the
a
ramping
potential
is-
additional cost to try to preserve this back section.
Well, let me continue.
Please continue.
I could envision removing the back portions, keeping the house, but I would really want to have all of the floor levels at the same floor level as the gym. So basically lowering the floor level in the house, reducing the basement height. Probably need to change some windows. You could do all that stuff, but frankly, to me, that's not really an appropriate historical approach. It's too radical of an alteration, but I could do it.
Yeah, there's a long hallway there to get to the gymnasium where we would propose ramps, but something to think about. It can't get solved here in this meeting.
Right.
Okay, Ms.
And
Masenko?
wouldn't necessarily even be part of, in my mind, shouldn't be part of the conditional use discussion.
Mr. Dellinger, I just want to make
Your
sure.
microphone, Nancy?
Oh, sorry. We've got to get a better sound system in here. I want to make sure I heard something that I think I heard. So we're here tonight to talk about conditional use. But did I hear you say that you are somewhat open to moving on and perhaps not filing for appropriateness? Did I hear you say you could actually see the property being used by other groups who might want to acquire it from you? Did I hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Now, what I've said
Okay, thank you.
was that I would be willing to trade the Eckstein School property for another property, preferably in Glendale, where we could get permission to build the facility that we're trying to build.
So we're going to talk about conditional use as this long-term facility tonight. We're going to be asked to vote on that with no sense that you're going to go forward with appropriateness.
Well, I want to proceed with this project. I want to pursue it in whatever way is possible. But I think personally, and given all the expression here, the most appropriate thing would be, I give you the property, give me someplace else to build this thing.
Okay.
It's pretty simple to me. Seems pretty straightforward.
That was a new piece of information. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
If you guys vote on the appropriateness, if you guys vote on the appropriateness,
Use the speaker.
and then it goes to the planning, is that the other thing? It goes to the planning committee that is not an open public?
Okay, this is getting a little longer than I thought. You go up to the microphone, identify yourself.
My name's Betsy Jones. I live on Church. I can see Eckstein School from my front door. If you guys vote tonight for the appropriateness, like they said, this would be an appropriate use of the building, then it next goes to a planning committee,
Okay.
and that's...
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this question is not relevant. We are
I want to
not-
know if
we are
if
not
there's
here
a
to
public
vote
hearing
on
for the next step.
appropriateness. How many? We
Okay,
are not
well, I'm
here to a
confused.
vote on appropriateness.
Okay.
I'm
We're
happy
not
to,
doing
I'm
that.
happy to repeat the process. We're here tonight for conditional use.
Right, if you approve the conditional use, the appropriateness then goes to the planning committee, is that what you're saying?
Yes, which
And
has a
that's not
public hearing.
a place where it's a public hearing where we
It's
could...
exactly like this, same process. There's a
Okay.
public hearing and a body.
Okay. Mr. Dellinger, please conclude.
Sure. I would like you to approve the conditional use in the residential district. Perhaps not just this site. If I could find another site that could accommodate this, that certificate of appropriateness could apply there as well, is what I would hope. And that I would hope that somehow or other we could find a way to make this work.
For the record and for everyone's understanding here, that this conditional use application applies only to this parcel.
Okay.
So if you wanted to do this property trade that you're discussing, then you would come to the same process to, assuming it's in a residential district, then you would go through this same process to obtain conditional use approval for that parcel. And then whoever holds Eckstein at that point would go through whatever avenue they need to for their use. But the conditional use applies to the property, so it wouldn't transfer
I expected you to say
within the
that,
village.
but you never know until you ask. I have nothing else to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments from council?
I have a question for David. Alan and I were just talking. He was saying the conditional use attaches to the property.
Correct.
If Mr. Dillinger were to sell or transfer the property, would the new owner have the conditional use permit conveyed with the transfer? Or
David,
does
can I
the
answer that?
transfer stay, does the permit stay with Mr. Dillinger,
I'll
the
defer to
applicant?
Kathy.
When we draft, if that were to happen, we would draft the written decision, and it would have whatever conditions and acknowledgement of the scope that you're approving. So for example, if Mr. Dellinger, I can't recall, said maybe 16 residents or 4 caregivers, anything that is in that written decision as the scope of what you've approved, that runs with the land. But it's only to the extent that we've written it out in the decision. So that's a good question to keep in mind, that when the decision is written, that scope is the only thing that they're working with on that property moving forward.
So my question.
But yes, transferring, that would
My
transfer.
question is that the permit does not run with the land, though.
It does,
It does?
yes. So when you write that decision, keep in mind that the scope you're approving, you're only approving the scope and the use, but that does run with the land, so it can be subject to transfer.
So is this permit, is this permit recorded?
It's not recorded, it's just simply a permit that it can be revoked, or it can,
Yeah, a record is kept in the village pertaining to the zone, with our zoning code, that marks this property as a conditional use. If it were to be approved, it would be on record with the village. It would not be recorded with the county.
We're getting into shaky grounds. I'm thinking of conditions that run with the property, that run with the building, that are transferable, and not simply a condition imposed upon it within the village government office.
Yeah.
Something that is recorded.
it is not, when I say runs with the land, in this context, you're right. Usually that's in the context you're speaking about, in a county records. It would not be recorded. It runs with the land as far as the local government permitting process is concerned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to ask council, is there an appetite to vote tonight? Or do we want to take some additional time to consider what we've heard?
From my
and
perspective.
take it up on the 30th. Yes, Mike?
Just from my perspective, and I'm just speaking for myself, there have been a couple of different things brought to light here from questions about whether or not and I know this gets outside of conditional use, but whether or not a first floor could be modified in order to try to preserve the home. This idea of, is there somewhere else that this thing could be built? And then all the ramifications that might follow some of those possible options that I can't get my arms around just sitting here in 5 minutes. So
Okay.
I don't know how I feel about voting tonight. I'm a little concerned if there are open options. To vote on conditional use may not be appropriate, but that's just my thought process. Anybody else, please feel free.
I'm leaning in that direction as well. There is a lot of new information.
Okay. Okay, I'm not hearing anybody who wants to make a motion at this stage, or Jeff?
I would make the motion that we defer this and for further discussion, particularly among the council.
How, do
I'm
we have to
sorry,
have a
could he
motion? Do we
what
have to
did he say?
actively defer it, or?
So do you want to just table the discussion until the next meeting?
Defers table, yes.
Or continue? Well, I guess the hearing is closed, but you can table the matter until next meeting and continue any deliberation and vote at that time.
Mr. Mayor, I'm cautious of, quote, closing the hearing, because that's what occurred in the Planning Commission, and critical information came to light after the hearing was closed and did not get considered or reflected, at least, in the resolution before us. So
Okay, so
if we
we
can
can
hold
conti- so-
just table this until the next council meeting?
Certainly, and you can reopen the hearing if at any time there is a vote to do that as well.
Right. So do we need a vote to put it on the table?
Yes.
Okay. Does somebody wish to make a motion?
I motion to table this hearing and continue it at the next council meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call or?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Clerk, we need a roll call here.
To table the discussion until the next meeting. Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Hoeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, motion carried. We are going to move back into our agenda and take up Ordinance 2021-29, an ordinance authorizing the increase of 2021 estimated revenue and appropriations of the community fund, a miscellaneous fund, and declaring an emergency. This concerns the funding for the program. This is Glendale, and there was, council decided that this was not something it wanted to fund. We have raised $3,000 in contributions, and these are from private sources, and they were written out to the village of Glendale. So what this ordinance would do is set up a part of the community fund to receive the donations and to spend the money for the program. Is there a motion for this ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Is there discussion? I guess this is an ordinance and it's an emergency, so I need a motion to waive 3 reads.
Mayor, Mrs. Duke had to take a break.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Fine if we all took a break?
Go ahead, take a
Before we
break.
do this? Thank you.
Yeah. We're beginning again, and this is still Ordinance 2021-29 about the revenues in the Community Fund, an ordinance concerning the This is Glendale program, and I believe we have a motion and a second already.
That is correct.
But do we have a I don't think we have a motion and a second to dispense with 3 reads.
That's correct.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Discussion?
I guess the question was, is the money placed, and when was the money placed in there? Is the programming underway or funds being spent?
No, no funds have been spent.
And how does this differ from the previous This is Glendale, which was going along without this kind of infusion of money?
This one is being funded privately. No village dollars are being spent on
I
it.
think the previous one was all volunteer, Marilyn, and this one, they have a professional
Okay.
videographer and producer.
Which if you see the latest production, I mean, he really has done a great job.
And who's determining the subjects, the topics, what's being videoed, what's coming out?
Excuse me, I'm confused, because, Mr. Mayor, I thought the question to council was the use of funds, the appropriateness of the funds, not the validity of the program. Didn't you ask council to approve the spending?
That was the request before, was because
Council-
we didn't have any money.
Right.
We wanted to begin the program again,
so
and
there was
we
never a
needed money to
question-
do it.
There was never a question about the validity of the program.
Not that I heard.
Thank you, okay.
I don't understand the validity, what that means. I'm inquiring into the content of the program because we do have expressed concerns about politics entering into the decision-making. So I'm just asking, who's making the decisions and what are the topics? Who's deciding what's being put forth in This is Glendale, now that it is going into the village funds?
It doesn't change anything because the money is all private, and so it's the same people who were doing it before, pretty much. And before, there was never any politics that got into it. Nobody ever accused This is Glendale of being political.
Correct.
So I had expressed a similar concern, not the same concern, prior about content. And the content for This is Glendale has always been to promote Glendale and provide information about the goings-on in Glendale and interesting facts, whatever. And then it was said to my question that it would be governed by, since it's being paid for by Glendale, it'll be governed by the same rules that we have for all of our media and our newsletters and all those things, and I feel comfortable with that.
Okay, any further discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For ordinance 2021-29, to dispense with the 3 reads, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Howeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
No.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
For the ordinance, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Howeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
I'm sorry. I thought we were voting on the ordinance. I'd like to change my previous vote to yes to dispense with 3 reads.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. For the ordinance, Ms.
No.
Duke? No. Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Baysmith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Resolution 2021-14, a resolution lifting the state of emergency in the village of Glendale. Bet a lot of you forgot that there was one, but last April, we voted along with the rest of the state to proclaim a state of emergency. It did help us obtain some funding at times. So now the underlying basis for that. The state law and county has gone away, so this is simply lifting the state of emergency. Is there a motion for this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
And let's see, there's no waving through reads. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I'm sorry to ask, but if the chief, yes, thank you. We've got so many chiefs down here. If you would kindly just give us a quick update on what you're seeing around the variants and COVID, I'd appreciate hearing it.
Okay, sure. The numbers have obviously have gone back up, continuing to rise. And that's not just here in Glendale, it's through the county as well as the state. We are meeting tomorrow morning again. Up to this point, we pretty much have shut down all of the usual reporting and meetings with that. I look for tomorrow to be reinstated and reinstate the fact of where the cases are at and what's going on with it. I'll be able to share more after tomorrow's meeting with EMA and all of the players in the county. So the numbers have gone back up. Part of it's the Delta variant. The Delta variant is not quite as intense of the symptoms, but it's much more easily transmittable. So, again, vaccinate's the answer.
Thank you, thank you.
Any further discussion? Madam Clerk?
Resolution 2021-14. Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Howeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next we turn to verbal resolution 2021-17, a resolution adopting the Village of Glendale estimated tax budget. David, can you fill us in, or is it David or Mike who fills us in on this?
Sure. Mike, do you want to? Oh, you're waving under me? Oh,
Go ahead.
Thank you. So earlier this evening at 6 p.m. we had the public hearing for the 2022 estimated tax budget. As council's aware, this is a procedural process. Every summer we file this tax budget with the state and county. As a lot of weight is put on the word estimated here. Budget for the upcoming year, so 2022 in this case. The budget looks very similar to how it does in the past, although as we've discussed in Finance Committee meetings, we are anticipating some savings on the personnel side due to changes this year that we've experienced earlier this year. So we, as of right now, are anticipating a break even, and then once we go into the budget process, we'll see that we're actually anticipating maybe even a slight surplus into 2022. But more information on that will come out through Finance Committee and through the budget process later in the year.
We had 3 residents that participated in the discussion.
Okay, do I have a motion for this resolution?
So
This is a
moved.
verbal resolution.
Yes, so moved.
A question, just a quick question. When is this due to the county? When must it be filed? What's the deadline?
So due to some personal matters, I was unable to hit the original mid or late July deadline. Although we have been in contact with the county, we do have an extension granted to mid-August, so we're well within our legal bounds and responsibilities. And so this will be filed well in advance of the extended deadline.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
For verbal resolution 2021-17, Mr. Bessel.
Aye.
Mr. Howeller.
Aye.
Ms. Duke.
Aye.
Ms. Masenko.
Aye.
Mr. Basemith.
Aye.
Mr. Kreidler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Turning now to the reports, I will make mine as brief as I can. I just want to give council a heads up that we have received a request to name the 10-acre parcel that we were considering for development recently as a park to be named after a former employee of the Public Works Department. I felt like this was putting the cart before the horse a little bit because we don't have a process or of standards for naming village properties. So I have asked Ms. Duke, as chair of the Laws Committee, to take on this task, and she has graciously consented to do so. So she will be in the process of developing a process for naming village properties and standards for doing so.
The Laws Committee will, thank you.
That's what I meant, yes, Laws Committee. Okay, that is it. Village Administrator, do you have a report?
I'm going to keep it I'm going to keep this very, very brief. Cleveland Park, we are working on the final punch list with the contractor. We anticipate that will be concluded here in the coming weeks. Sharon Avenue, we still do not have a definitive start date from the contractor for the repave, although we do have the substantial completion date of October 31st that they've agreed to, so we're still on track for that. As of right now, the next thing is the upcoming Streets Committee meeting in a couple of weeks to discuss the hedgerow stormwater project in a little bit more depth, and I'll have more information to present at that meeting on that project. As of right now, I'm happy to take questions, but that concludes my report.
All right, then we start with the committee reports. Madam Clerk?
Finance Committee, please.
The Finance Committee did meet. We reviewed the status of the village finances through mid-year. Expenses are in line with where expected, revenues the same. We are still anticipating a small surplus for this year, and that was the main content of that meeting. Minutes will be out this week. That's it for Finance.
Thank you. Fire Committee, please.
It was another joint meeting of the Fire Committee and Buildings. We met on July 1. The minutes are on the website, and we're meeting again tomorrow, August 3. Both meetings, and specifically tomorrow, to consider changes in a project plan. And over to the chief.
Okay, thank you. So, as I talked a little bit when our people were sworn in, we finished up one of the 36-hour volunteer firefighter courses this couple weeks ago. I'm proud to say that all of our people, we were 100% passing. Once again, goes to what our instructors are, the quality of training that they're getting on a state level. State's averaging about 62% pass rate, so our guys have done real well. We're wrapping up with the EMT class. They're testing this week. Over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we were here all day doing incident command training. This is an actual certification to be an incident commander on an emergency scene. This is the only system that's nationwide for that certification level. So we'll have 12 guys completed with that. Shout out of a thanks to the Sam's Club, donated another skid of bottled water for our guys. It's we've been able to have this now. This is our third time that they've supplied that for us, and that usually lasts us about 6 months. We were a participant in three major fires this month. The one being in Glendale at Landmark Church. One of the largest fires in Glendale in a number of years. The maintenance shed, and a storage shed that burned due to some causes of some delay in making the call. There was confusion over where the fire was actually at. Evendale was dispatched as the primary unit. It wasn't until they arrived on the scene that we realized that it was actually on the Glendale side of the Landmark property. We had 13 fire departments there, 65 firefighters. We laid 6,000 feet of supply hose, pumped a little over 70,000 gallons of water, and 400 man hours on one fire. Fire loss for that fire was $200,000. That's the highest loss we've had since I've been chief. And just keep it on your schedules for open house at the fire station here on October the 10th. And we'll have more details coming out on that in the near future.
I have one question real quick. On your report, what is a good intent call?
Good intent would be we would get dispatched to a fire outside of a house. You get there and it actually was a grill. So somebody had started a grill, a neighbor or somebody passing by saw it, thought the house was on fire,
got
made
it.
a good intention of,
Okay.
thought that there was something wrong. Just cooking.
Thanks.
Thank you. Laws and claims, please.
Laws and claims did not meet in July.
Thank you. Police committee, please.
We did not meet in July either, and I'll turn it over to the chief.
The police department obtained a provisional acceptance on part 1 of the Ohio Collaborative standards, which part 1, it was the use of force and recruitment. This week we will submit part 2, and then hopefully by the end of the month we'll have part 3, which is all 3 phases of the Ohio Collaborative at this point until they come out with a new phase. Also, for those that don't know, Officer Rocks accepted his medical retirement from the state. His last day was the 31st of July. We will be having a meet and greet for him on August the 6th, which is this coming Friday. Lunch will be from 11 to 1, and then we're inviting outside agencies in to say goodbye, and the schools to come down and teachers to come down and say goodbye to him as well. We'll have the same setup that we'll do the same thing for him that we did for Chief Warman when he retired.
What was the time on that again? I'm sorry.
Time for lunch is 11 to 1, and then 1 to 3 for outside agencies and the schools and anybody else that wants to stop by and say goodbye.
Thanks.
And that's all I've got.
Thank you. Public buildings and historic preservation, please.
Public buildings did not meet in July, and what Nancy mentioned earlier, we do have a meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock to discuss the fire department and the fire remodel and the public building.
Thank you. Recreation and playgrounds.
Recreations and Playgrounds, pardon me, met twice to discuss with the Brock Foundation development of the tennis court and pickleball courts at Summit Park to determine layout, finances, and the progress on that general proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Streets, public improvement, and lights, please.
The Streets Committee did not meet. We're working on scheduling a meeting in mid-August.
Thank you. Utilities Committee.
Utilities Committee also did not meet in July and also will meet in early August. So it sounds like we're going to have very busy meeting schedules.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reports from Clerk and Treasurer. Madam Clerk,
I have no report.
Mr. Treasurer.
I forwarded the investment report to council, so let me know if you have any questions.
Okay. We have received 2 reports from one for okay, they were in the back. Sorry, we did receive them, but they are in the back of the document. Okay, we have the certification for the payment of certain bills from the general checking account. We have the certification for the payment of certain bills from the enterprise checking account. We have the revenue report year-to-date from January 1st through June 30th. And we have an expenditure report from January 1st through June 30th. Do I have a motion to acknowledge the receipt of these reports?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.